Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. It seems like we have a small showing so far, but I think some students will come in a little bit late. Hope everybody had a good weekend. And yeah, so you saw that your grades were up for the midterm twos, and you saw my solutions for those. I put those in the email, and then you saw that I updated uh, all the homework assignments that were due thus far, and those solutions are updated too. And then remember, this one is due today. The chapter 10, chapter 11 homework is due today. So you can post that one by the end of the day when you get a chance. And we're going to continue doing some more macro stuff. And we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of build up the fiscal policy today, which we'll do via chapter. We're doing 2 chapters again, but they're not too bad. And so another double chapter day. Um, but we're getting close to the end. So we got, I think, 3 more lectures. Well, we got this lecture and then 3 more. So basically, the plan is do these 2 chapters today. Chapter 14 is a little longer, so I just want to do one that day. We'll do chapter 14 next week, and then we'll finish off with chapter 15 on monetary policy. And then I think I plan another day where we can just do some practice problems and do a little review session for the take-home final. So that's kind of the plan for the rest of the semester. And again, all macroeconomics from here on out. So a little less math intense, I think. And I think students usually like the macroeconomic stuff a little bit more, I'd say. So no more of those, no more big gains from trade models. So that's done. That's in the past. But all right, so today let's start with chapter 12, and then we'll get into chapter 13. And then there's only one homework assignment for this week as well, and I combined the 2 chapters for it's a homework for chapters 12 and 13, but it's just one assignment. Okay. All right, so you can go ahead and open up. Okay, so we got a bunch of things today. We got you can open up the study guides for the chapter 12 and the chapter 12 Excel file here. So chapter 12 with note solutions, examples chapter 12, and then the chapter 13 with note solutions. So those 3 we'll get to today. Okay, also we're going to be doing the PowerPoint for chapter 12 and the PowerPoint for chapter 13 next. And then finally, we'll get to this later, but I have one homework. That's not open. I have one homework assignment, but I combined the chapters, so you have a homework for chapters 12 and 13. So we'll get to that last. But first, let's cover the chapters, kind of introduce some new things, and then we'll learn about fiscal policy. Okay. All right. So first thing we're going to talk about is this big macro concept, this big macro model called the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. And so it's very similar to the concepts that we learned in just supply and demand, but it applies to the whole aggregate or the whole macro economy. Okay, so let's introduce the 2 terms, or the 2 graphs, I guess, the aggregate demand, the AD curve, and then we'll get to the aggregate supply curve, and then we'll look at them both together. But first, let's talk about aggregate demand. So this is uh, just what it sounds like. It's demand in aggregate, so it's the demand for all goods and services in the whole U.S. macroeconomy. Okay, so what this is so it's real GDP desired. So we learned what GDP was. All right, last time that was all of last week's lecture. chapter 10 and 11. And so what this model shows, it shows real GDP desired at each price level. And there's just like a normal demand curve, there's an inverse relationship because when the overall price level goes up, the demand for stuff in the whole economy goes down and vice versa. So it just kind of looks like this, which will make a lot of sense. Okay, so think of this price level as like the CPI, like the consumer price index that measures inflation if that goes up or down. And so this is just the overall price level, right? So this is um, just think of this as a big index, the price level of the whole. You know, it's not just one thing; it's kind of the overall measure of prices. Okay, and basically that's the y-axis, and the x-axis is real domestic output or GDP, same thing. So all we're saying here is just like a demand curve, when the overall price level goes down, um, more output is demanded and domestic output goes up. When the price level goes up, then demand goes down, aggregate demand goes down up this curve, and there's an inverse relationship. So basically, when prices are higher, um, the overall economy demands less things because they're more expensive and they're less affordable. And when prices are lower, demand goes up, and that leads to more output. So you get this nice, inverse relationship. Looks like a demand curve, but we're looking at the whole U.S. economy. So instead of this being a price of a good and this being the demand for a good, this is the overall price level of the whole economy, and this is the real demand for output in the whole economy. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. Okay, so the things that can the determinants of aggregate demand or things that can shift it are the changes in all the spending categories we talked about last time. So remember we discussed and learned that GDP is just the summation of consumer spending, which was big C, plus investment spending, which was I subscript G, plus government spending, which was big G, and plus net exports, which was X subscript N. All right, so that was our equation for GDP. So basically, those are the things that determine aggregate demand. So uh, when demand goes up or down, that means that one of these categories or one or more is they're spending more. Okay, so if prices go down, consumers buy more stuff, uh, private businesses buy more stuff, the government buys more stuff, and the international spending goes up. So all these, when the overall price level goes down, output goes up by increases in one or more of these categories, and vice versa. When the price level goes up, what you see is actually wait, I'm just saying this wrong. Oh, okay, sorry. So I'm kind of showing a I spoke there. All right, so this is a when prices are something, then this is the aggregate demand curve, right? Downward sloping. But these things can cause the aggregate demand curve to shift. All right, so basically what I'm trying to say here is that if any of those categories changes, goes up or down at the same level of prices, then that's going to shift the demand curve. Okay, so if at constant prices, um, consumer spending goes up, or investment spending goes up, or government spending goes up, or export spending goes up, then that's going to shift the demand curve to the right. All right, because at the same constant price, uh, one or more of these spending categories is increased, and vice versa. If at the same price, any of these things go down. Okay, so it kind of looks like this, where if there's an increase in any of these four things, all right, at constant prices, then that's going to increase the aggregate demand curve this way. So to the right from 81 to 82. Okay, that's basically a rightward shift or an increase in aggregate demand. If any of these things go down or decrease, right, at the same price, then that's a leftward shift or a decrease from 81 to 83. So a negative or leftward shift. Just like remember we had the determinants of a demand curve where something that would increase demand would shift to the right, and something that would decrease demand would shift it to the left. So same idea, except we're looking at the whole economy and the whole level of prices. Okay, so make sure you distinguish between going up or down the demand curve and shifting it. So if the price level changes, okay, then that's going to move us along the aggregate demand curve. So the price level goes from here to here, then we go up the demand curve, aggregate demand curve. If the price level goes from here to here, then we go down the demand curve. Now, if any of these, if at constant prices, any of these things change demand-wise, then the demand curve shifts. Okay? So if there's a change in these four things, or any one of these four things, we shift the demand curve up, whether it's an increase or a decrease. If the price level just changes, we go up or down the demand curve. So this is the negative relationship. But if any of these things, like if consumers decide they're going to spend more at the same prices, that's going to shift the demand curve. Okay, so any of these things changing shifts it. Prices changing goes up or down the demand curve. Okay, so that's the general idea of the aggregate demand curve or the AD curve. Now, the aggregate supply curve is probably what you'd expect. Um, Total supply for the whole economy or the whole macro economy when the price level changes. Okay, so slides 12 to 17. Okay, here we go. So what this is this is total real output produced at each price level. So this relationship is going to be, well, dependent on the time horizon, but I'll explain here. And so there's basically three time horizons you can look at. We're going to focus on the main one, which is the short run, but just to note the context, there's a immediate short run supply curve, basically like that looks like this, where you can't make any price adjustments. There's this one, the short run supply curve, where you can make changes, where you can change the price level, but you can't change all prices. You can't change like um, wages or you basically can't change um, like when we talked about short run and long run. I want to say it was chapter 6. Remember, short run was basically you can change the wages and change the prices, but you can't change, like you can't build new plants. You can't add increases in capital. So that's what we're looking at here. So same type of short run. And then you also have the long run, in which you can make all adjustments. Okay, so we're kind of looking at the one in the middle, where you can look at what's called an immediate short run AS curve, which is just perfectly elastic. You can look at the one we're gonna focus on, which is the short run supply curve, which is upward sloping. And there's also a long run supply curve, which is perfectly inelastic. Okay, so this is the long run one and the short run, the immediate short run are pretty much extremes, where we're saying like there's things you can look at here where this is the firm can't make any adjustments, and this one is the firm can make any adjustment they want. Now all the interesting stuff happens in the short run, which is why we're going to focus on this one. Okay, so just if you read the textbook, you'll see there's a lot of stuff, or there's a little section on the different time horizons: short run, immediate short run, and long run. The only one you have to know for this class is the short run supply curve, which looks like this. So just know in the context, there's this one here and this one here, but we're only going to focus on this one for the context of this class. Okay, so when we say aggregate supply curve, we're talking about the short run supply curve. Okay. All right. So the graph here on slide 14, only focus on this one. Don't worry about the other ones for this class. Okay. So as you might expect, there is a positive relationship between prices and what is supplied. Okay. So when the general price level goes up, the U.S. economy supplies more stuff and firms produce more. Okay, so just like a normal supply curve, there is a positive relationship between the price level and supply. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. So prices go up, firms on the margin want to produce more. Prices go down, that lowers the revenue, and firms on the margin produce less. Okay, so it makes total sense. Firms are in the revenue game, and higher prices leads to more production. Lower prices leads to less production. Okay, so what is going to change or shift the aggregate supply curve? And again, we're only focusing on the short run supply curve. Okay, so this one. Okay, so what would change it? So these are similar to what we kind of studied in the chapter 3 supply and demand section, where if input prices go up or down, okay, that's going to affect aggregate supply. If the input price increases, then that's going to affect the supply. And so if firms have to pay more to get the inputs or the resources to make the final product, they're going to have to increase their prices. Um, and so if this goes up, that makes it more costly to supply on average. And so firms decrease supply because it got more costly. Okay, so right, and then if productivity goes up or down, so if there's a boost in technology, if at the same prices it just becomes more productive, then firms are going to produce more because it got cheaper. And then maybe any change in legal institutional environments, like if you're looking at firms that produce electricity, and if there's anything associated with like coal production or um, fossil fuel generation for electricity, there's usually some um, rules you have to follow. Where if you're polluting some amount of emissions, right, you have to either pay a tax or you have to have some special permission. So depending on right, and this whole environment for that changed once we realized that carbon emissions were bad for the atmosphere. Okay, so if something changes, that might make it more costly given whatever you're producing. Okay, so all of these things that affect supply are going to position it. But then if these things change, right, just like we talked about with the spending things, so if this changes, if input prices go up, the supply curve decreases or shifts to the left. If productivity goes up, that makes it cheaper, the supply curve increases or shifts to the right. This depends on how it affects things. Okay, so if changes in institutions or contracts or government regulations make it more costly, then you're going to have a decrease in aggregate supply. If it makes it less costly, you're going to have an increase. So it depends. Okay, and then changes are raise or lower per unit production cost, right? Okay, so this is what we're looking at here. Aggregate supply curve, our short run aggregate supply curve. Start with AS1. Okay, so if any of these things make it more costly to supply on average, then the supply curve is going to decrease or shift to the left. If any of those determinants make it cheaper or more productive given the same price level, right? So now at the same prices, it's cheaper to produce, then the supply curve, the AS curve is going to increase or shift to the right. So going from AS1 to AS3 would be a decrease in the aggregate supply curve. Going from AS1 to AS2 is an increase. And just think of it so just hold prices constant. So if we're at this price here, I'm just picking like a line. Okay, so if at that price supply increases, then we're shifting out. If at that price supply decreases, then we're going this way. So when the price level is constant, supply goes up or down, then that's either a decrease, increase, or a decrease. Okay, so you probably guessed what's coming next. but we're going to look at both curves together, the AS curve and the AD curve in equilibrium on slide 21. And this is basically how real GDP or output is determined in the economy, or kind of the idea. Okay, here we go. So these are different. So here are different price levels. And this is, remember, this is the index. Okay, so this is just the level, the level of the index. Okay, so if the index goes up, that means the overall price level has gone up. If the index goes down, overall prices have gone down. So what you see here is when prices go up, real output demand, or the AD curve, goes down, and when prices go up, real output supply, or the AS curve, goes up. Okay, so we got a negative relationship between price level and AD, and a positive relationship between price level and AS. And then you can see that in this example, there's one price level 100 in which the two curves are equal. And so that would be our equilibrium here, where price level of 100 and output of 510 billions of dollars. Okay, so essentially there's some price level at which the AS curve and the AD curve are equal, or in equilibrium, and that's how we determine how much output to produce, or that's the idea. Okay, now last time we talked about inflation, right? So I think these concepts were even in the homework, demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Okay, so I think I know we talked about them last time, and I think I even put those in the homeworks that was due today. Um, so we introduced these types of inflation, but now since we're looking at the AS curve and the AD curve, I can show you graphically how these concepts work. So let's illustrate how we can show both types of inflation by looking at this type of AS/AD curve. Okay, so graphically, we can show both types of inflation, starting with demand pull on slide 22. Okay, so all right, so here's the idea. So remember, demand pull inflation from last time is inflation caused by increases in demand. So if the overall price level, or if the price level is P1, okay, and consumers say that we'll pay more for goods and services on average, right? So if just spending is, demand increases, and consumers are bidding up prices on average because they're willing to spend more, right? So if the whole U.S. economy is willing to spend more, on average on goods and services, that's going to lead to an increase in aggregate demand, because we're saying that at this price level, we demand more. So if the aggregate demand curve shifts up like that, that's essentially just we're going up the supply curve, and see the result is we go from P1 QF. QF is full employment, output at full employment, and Q1 is the new increase. So we're going from here to here, and see what happens with the price goes up from P1 to P2. And if the price goes up, that's inflation, right? So we've shown the price level increasing, which by definition is inflation. So if the price index of the CPI goes up, that's inflation. So this is where inflation is caused by an increase in aggregate demand. So if the whole economy on average decides they're going to pay more they're willing to pay more for goods and services, that's going to push the price level up, and that's, as a result, inflation caused by demand pulling the price up. Okay, the other type of inflation is caused by the supply curve shift. So again, we're showing an increase in prices, but this is a different way that it happens. If we go from point A, and basically the idea here is that overall input prices increase, So for firms, it just becomes on average more costly to produce to get the final goods and services produced. So if their input costs or their production costs, the resource costs become more expensive, they're going to have to increase prices on average because it's now more costly for them to produce things. So if the factors of production increase, what's going to happen is that the supply level in the economy is going to decrease. Okay, so we basically said this happened. All right, so input prices change. Okay, so if input prices go up, we already talked about that. That's a decrease in the aggregate supply curve. That's what we're showing here. Okay, if input prices on average go up, that makes it more costly. Some suppliers are going to leave, and overall the supply curve decreases, and we go from A to B. Okay, but see what happens. We basically go from here to here, and so we lose this much output, and the price goes up. And if the price goes up from P1 to P2, that's inflation. Okay, so if prices go up, all right, if the consumer price index goes up, that by definition is inflation. And there's two ways we can show it graphically. One, demand goes up, and consumers just say we're going to buy more. We'll spend more for the same level of goods and services. That pushes the price up. That's inflation. Or suppliers have to decrease production because it got more costly to supply. All right, so supply goes this way, and that pushes the price up. That's inflation. So there's two ways you can get inflation: demand going up, or supply going down, and we showed it like that. So this would be illustrating demand pull inflation, and the inflation is going from P1 to P2, and this would be illustrating cost push inflation, and here the inflation is going from P1 to P2. So both times we're showing the price level going up, inflation, but different ways in which it can occur. Okay. All right, and you can probably think of many examples of right now there's I mean the you can think of individual examples in which the price level is going up. So if I mean well uh, yeah, so like when if the price level is going up for all right now the price level is going up for all the inputs for houses. So I know that like the cost of board feet and the cost of a bunch of other like sheetrock and stuff like that is gone up lots of time or quadruple whatever it is. The price has gone up a lot, and so if those prices, if enough of those prices on average go up, okay, that's going to push the price level up because right now consumers are saying we're willing to pay more for board feet for all these inputs that go into houses. Um, whether that pushes the overall price level over up or not, I'm not sure. But if consumers bid up enough things in price and the overall price level goes up, that's demand pull inflation. In the same way, it can be looked at as suppliers. So if we're looking at firms supplying, new infrastructure or new houses or new, right, and those inputs go up. So if it gets more costly to supply those houses or those buildings or garages, whatever, okay, they're going to have to increase their costs, and that either way, those things can both lead to uh, price level increases if those price increases outweigh or bring up the average overall level of prices. Okay. All right. The next thing here is called so I'm not sure if this is in the slides, but it's in the textbook. And so the ratchet effect here has to do with prices. It's kind of an analogy for what happens to prices when the economy goes up or down. So on slide 24, okay, so what we're saying here is we're trying to make an analogy for downward price level inflexibility. So we're saying that prices flex upwards but not downward, and the ratchet effect has to do with the like the tool, the ratchet, you know, the like this thing. Okay, so the idea here, the point of the analogy is that like the tool, the ratchet, if you ever use one of these things, when you crank it, it ratchets up, but when you try to go back down, it locks. So that's the analogy for prices. Prices will ratchet up, but when you try to go back down, they lock or they stay fixed. So the ratchet prices can ratchet up, but not down. All right, that's the idea here. Okay, and basically we're saying that so both these examples, we illustrated prices going up, but what we're saying is that if the economy uh, faces a recession or um, there's a decrease in aggregate demand, it's unlikely that, I mean, in extreme cases like what happened in March, prices did go down a little bit, but compared to everything else, prices don't flex downward very often, and there's many reasons. Um, Price wars. Okay, so if there's competitors like like automobile companies or soda companies or cereal, whatever it is, if you're competitors and looking at things in the uh, whatever any market where there's competition, if you decrease your price, then the response by your competitors is also going to be to decrease prices, and so you might get short-term profits, but in the long run, you're probably leading to just lower prices overall for goods and services. So there's a big fear of price wars where trying to undercut your competition might just lead to the other company lowering their price, then everybody's worse off. Okay, menu costs. It's costly to change to think of this the pricing. So it's costly just to make those changes. So if you think of a store like Target, where they probably have like thousands of SKUs, different codes. Okay, so just changing all those prices is very costly. Now, if prices go up, they're more than willing to increase those prices, but it's unlikely that they want to pay higher costs to lower their prices when they're going to get less revenue for that. So that's another thing. Wage contracts, which means that if you have a contract or a wage, that's guaranteed to the employer. You can't just break the contract. Um, there's whole models on efficiency wages where, like in a recession or if the company is doing poorly, what you studies have shown what you don't want to do is pay all your workers less money, because if they were used to a certain wage or a certain income and you just say, oh, we're going to pay you less, that they're not going to like that, and they're going to work less, or they're not going to give as much effort. Okay, and then also minimum wage laws. So the wage thing, basically what the idea here is that if we're in a boom or the economy is doing well, on average wages are going to go up. But if we're in a recession or we're in a downward period of the economy like we have been recently, you, companies don't lower their wages. All right, what they do is they keep some of their employees, and the other ones get laid off or furloughed, stuff like that. So that's the idea here, is that these are all a bunch of this is all a bunch of evidence of why prices adjust quickly when the economy is booming, but are very reluctant to adjust downward when the economy is in a recession. Oops. Okay, so we can illustrate um, a recession with the same graph on slide 25. Okay, so this is the idea. So I showed you demand going up causing inflation, supply going down causing inflation, but look what happens here. So this is a recession. So the idea is, so this is important to see the contrast with prices. And basically we're trying to illustrate this concept here. So if we're here, and again, QF is supposed to be full employment output. So this is like the target. Okay, and so if we go into a recession, the output goes both, or employment goes up, and we're below full employment, like we were recently, or like we could be still now. So if we go from, if basically at this price, we go into a recession, and aggregate demand goes down, or consumers are just the demand for buying goods and services goes down. So aggregate demand goes down for whatever reason. Okay, we go from 81 to 82. So, but see what happens to prices? Nothing. So we typically stay at the original price, P1. All right, so see how we're not going down to P2. Instead, what happens, and what pretty much happens during a recession, is that prices don't adjust, they stay where they were, and output gets worse than it would be. So see how output is lower than it would be here if the prices would adjust. So what I'm saying is that if prices were allowed to adjust perfectly downward, um, the recession wouldn't be as bad. But that's not what happens. What happens is prices pretty much stay where they are, but output gets worse. So here you can see that going from here to here, uh, the decrease in aggregate demand put us in a recession, but the price level stays here. So the price stays at P1, but output goes all the way down from QF to Q1. So notice here how the price kind of gets locked at P1, and again, when demand goes up, the prices go up. But when demand goes down, prices stay the same, or pretty much stay the same, and output goes worse than it would be before. Okay, last concept here is something called the multiplier, and we're going to revisit this in the next chapter as well, but slide 26 shows this idea. Okay, so the idea here is that shifts in the AD, aggregate demand, embody an initial change in spending, but I already said that, but there's a multiplied effect, right? There's kind of a trickle down effect. So basically, like when one of those, remember, so from, let me pull this up. Okay, so this is from last week, but I'm referring to this equation that we learned last week here. So the GDP equation that was C plus IG plus G plus XN. Okay, so the idea of the multiplier, which is an observed concept, is that like we know that when consumption spending goes up, GDP goes up. We know that if any of these things go up, GDP goes up. But the idea is it's not a one for one. In fact, when one of these things goes up, the effect on GDP is a multiplied effect. So there's kind of a trickle down effect where if consumers spend, all right, that money doesn't just go, like it doesn't just, like if consumption goes up by a billion, GDP goes up by some multiplied effect. It might be like 1.5 billion, right? So there's a trickle down effect because when someone spends, all right, that goes into the pockets of someone, and then like the firm that gets the money, or whoever gets the money, they spend a little bit more, and so there's a chain reaction of events. Usually, what happens when someone spends, that leads to more spending by someone else. So like um, if someone buys a new car, uh, the car company gets that money, and they might use it to buy something else. They might use it to buy another car. So every time someone spends in any category, that leads to a little more spending by the person or the company that receives the money. Okay? And so it's not a one-for-one deal. In fact, when any of these things goes up, there's a multiplied effect, and it depends, but the multiplier shows the multiplied effect of any of the spending categories on GDP. So for example, if consumption went up by 100, which led to GDP going up by 200, the multiplier would be 2, right? So it tells you the multiplied effect of any change on the resulting GDP. Okay, and the simple equation here is the multiplier is just the change in real GDP divided by the initial change in spending. So again, just to make examples simple, all right, so let's say investment spending went up by 500, and the change in real GDP was 1,000. Okay, the multiplier is 1,000 divided by 500, which is 2. All right, if government spending went up by 1,000 and GDP went up by 5,000, then the multiplier is 5. So this shows when one of the spending categories increases and that you get a resulting change in real GDP, that's the multiplied effect. So that we try to show that in the graphs. Okay, so we try to say that if any of these things goes up, um, aggregate demand goes up, which it does, but this is supposed to illustrate the multiplied effect, where that dotted line is the change in the spending category, but the full effect is this shift. So this is like the increase in spending, and this is the multiplied effect. And this would be like, it goes the other way as well. This is like the decrease in spending, and the full shift is the multiplied effect. Okay, so any change in spending doesn't have just a one-for-one effect. It has a multiplied effect, and that's the idea. Uh, okay, so those are all the key concepts from chapter 12. The AD and AS curve, the different types of inflation, the ratchet effect, or the fact that prices don't ratchet down, how we can illustrate recessions and inflation, and then finally the multiplier, which is going to be very important in government policy or fiscal policy. Okay, so I got an example to show you, but everyone good so far? Any questions on what we did in this chapter? Okay, so there's some optional videos, aggregate demand, aggregate supply. This is a nice one. It illustrates the concept of the multiplier effect. If you want to look at that, I think we only have one example. Um, yeah, we do, but it's got some parts. So the idea here is that I think there's one of these on your homework question. Let me see. Oh, actually, there's not. There's not one of these in your homework, but there is one, I believe, on the take-home final, I think. Okay, so what we got here is a little chart that shows different price levels and what happens to real GDP demanded, which is the AD curve, and what also happens to real GDP supplied, which is the AS curve. And you can clearly see the positive relationship between the AS curve and the price level, and the negative relationship between the AD curve and the price level. Okay, so here's different amounts of GDP demanded, and here's different amounts of real GDP supplied at different price levels. Okay, so you got that chart, and let's suppose that the AD and the AS schedules for our hypothetical economy are shown in the table here. All right, part A, what is the equilibrium price level and the equilibrium level of real GDP in this economy? Then we can illustrate that with the AD-AS curve. All right, so you can see there's one price level which both are equal, which is 200. All right, that's when the AD is 300 and also the AS is 300. Any other price level, all right, if you go up, supply is above demand. If you go down, demand's above supply. The only one where they're equal is this one. Okay, so I graphed that one here. This is part A. I just basically put a chart in Excel, and here's our price level. Here's our real GDP in billions, and just plotting these points, the real GDP demanded and the price level is going to give you the aggregate demand curve right here. And plotting these points, the price level and the real GDP supplied, is going to give you the supply curve, the AS curve. Okay, and there's only one price level, 200, in which this is 300 and that is 300, and that's what I showed here. Okay, so there's our AD schedule, our AS schedule, and here's the equilibrium which occurs when the price level is 200 and real GDP is 300 billion. Okay, and I put this in Blackboard if you want to see the Excel work. Okay, here's the chart. Here are the graphs, which kind of plot those points over there. So you basically have to plot. If you're doing this in Excel, you have to plot one of the curves first, and then you have to plot the second curve separately. So plotting this would be the AD curve, and then plotting this would be the AS curve. Part B. All right, so now if something's going to change, what happens? Let's suppose that buyers decide to purchase 200 billion of extra real output at each price level, or is the new equilibrium price level and the real level of real output. So let's illustrate this. So basically, the conclusion here is that the demand goes up by 200 billion. Okay, so at each price level, we're basically showing demand pull inflation. At each price level, buyers decide to purchase 200 billion of extra real output. So you can interpret that as an increase in the aggregate demand curve of 200 billion. So we're just going to shift the curve out 200 billion. So at each price level, add 200 to this, add 200 to this, and so on. So it's just a rightward shift like this here. Okay, so see how all I did was add 200 to each of these original demand locations, because at each price level, demand is plus 200. All right, so all we did here was shift, see how the AD curve goes from this point. All right, so if we start here at 200, and now we see that that shifts out 200. So the demand curve goes out to AD prime. And what happens when we add 200 to all these levels? All right, so now this is 100 plus 200 is 300. This is 200 plus 200, which is 400. And all of these are plus 200. So you can see with that occurring with the demand shift or the increase, the new price level is 250, where now that's what the new AD curve and the old AS curve are. So we basically just illustrated demand pull inflation. Okay, so see how the AD curve shifts out to AD prime, and the new equilibrium is a price level of 250 and real output of 400 billion. So demand has gone up, prices have gone up, and output has gone up as well. Okay, and so if you were doing this in Excel, what I did is see I just added 200 to all the original demands. Okay, and that's it. So that's the rightward shift, and you can see the new demand curve, which is 200 to the right. Okay, last part C. In addition to part B, suppose that the amount of real GDP supplied increases by 400 billion at each price level. Now, what's the new equilibrium price level and real output? And let's illustrate this. So now we have a increase in aggregate supply of plus 400 billion. So now what we're doing is adding 400 to all of these original values at each price level. So the price level column or index hasn't changed. what has changed is this went up and then this went up. So part C, we need to show a increase in the AS curve of 400. Okay, so if you add 400 to all of these values, all right, 400 plus 450 is 850, 400 plus 400 is 800, and so on. This would indicate a plus 400 in each of these values, and that's shown here as a rightward or increase in the AS curve, so it goes all the way over here. Okay, so now we have demand shifted out by 200, supply shifted out by 400, and if you look at the chart, the new equilibrium price level is 150 now. Right? So now that's where these two are equal at the increase in the AD and the increase in AS. It looks like, well, because the supply curve shifted out so much, right, the supply effect dominated, it was bigger. So the price level after the two things happen is lower. And the new equilibrium is 600 billion at a price level 150, right there. Okay, and I just did that here in Excel. If you want to do it, all I did was a plus 400, see to all of the original supply values. Okay, and this final graph reflects the AD prime curve, which increased to the right plus 200, and the AS curve, which increased to the right 400 billion. So this is here's the original, here's just the demand curve increasing, and here's both curves increasing. And if both curves increase, you know that output's going to go up. And depending on which curve shifted bigger, in this case it was the AS curve, that's going to lead to a lower price level. And you just look at the chart and see after any change, what's the new price that equates this to this. Okay, so that's that one. And again, this question, this type of question, it's not on the homework assignment, but I believe it is on the take-home final exam. So everyone, any questions on what we did here? If you saw one of these on the final exam, well, we'll probably do another example later, but okay. So we're done with chapter 12, which was introducing the ADAS curve, introducing the multiplier, and then showing how you can show inflation or recessions on the AD-AS curve. So we're going to use those concepts in that graph and that model to illustrate fiscal policy. And that's what we're doing here in chapter 13. So chapter 13 is explaining and introducing fiscal policy and then showing it graphically. And then we're going to do some multiplier stuff. Okay. Okay, so first thing is let's introduce in the simple concept of macroeconomics and just introductory econ what fiscal policy means. Okay, so fiscal policy on slide 2. Okay, so all we're doing here is fiscal policy in this sense is deliberate changes in government spending and or taxes. So that's all we're in this concept, in the concept of this class, fiscal policy just means increasing or decreasing government spending or increasing or decreasing taxes or some combination of both. So that's it. So if you looked at the original equation, which I think I closed again, but okay, so here's our equation for GDP, right? GDP equals C plus IG plus G plus XN. Okay, so how we would illustrate, or how we would show government's or fiscal policy is if government spending goes up, right, that goes up and GDP goes up. So increasing G or decreasing G would lead to changes in GDP. That's government policy. Or if the government increases or decreases taxes, so an increase in taxes is going to indirectly drop consumption spending because now it's more expensive, right? Or you have less disposable income. Or if taxes get lowered, you have more money in your bank account and more disposable income, and this goes up. So government spending would affect GDP, or sorry, fiscal policy would affect GDP by increasing G or decreasing G, or by indirectly affecting consumption through taxes. So that's how you would show the effects of fiscal policy in this simple equation. Okay, and so what we're doing here is the government is either trying to deliberately do something with fiscal policy to either achieve full employment, if we're below full employment like we probably are now, uh, control inflation, right, if that's a problem, or encourage economic growth. So this one, we're trying to boost the economy. This one, we're trying to slow it down. And this one, we're trying to boost the economy. Okay, so basically, uh, if the government wants to achieve full employment or try to boost the economy, they could increase government spending or lower taxes. That would also facilitate economic growth. Or if the economy is like coming out of recession or prices have gone, if inflation becomes a problem, you want to halt or slow down the economy, and you can lower or decrease government spending or increase taxes. Okay. Uh, okay. So we would call um, trying to fight, trying to speed up the economy or get out of recessions or unemployment. We would call that expansionary fiscal policy. And basically, what that is, this is used if we're in a recession or unemployment is a problem, like it's been recently. Okay, so conducting expansionary fiscal policy is just increasing government spending, cutting taxes, or some combination of both. That's it. Okay, here it is. All right, so this is used during a recession or a global pandemic. Um, expansionary fiscal policy is either increasing government spending, decreasing taxes, or a combination of both. And we know this creates a deficit because the government has to spend by borrowing. Okay, so this is deficit spending. On the graph, here's how you would show it. So uh, basically, so if we're below full employment, we're starting here at this 490, which is the recession. So we're starting in a recession. We want to boost the economy. Okay, fiscal policy would be either increasing government spending, which is going to increase this and increase GDP and shift the AD curve to the right, or cutting taxes, which is going to increase consumption spending and increase GDP, which is going to shift the AD curve. So affecting this or this in the positive direction, okay, would mean shifting the AD curve to the right. So this is showing how the government, in theory, could increase government spending, cut taxes, and cause the AD curve or increase in the aggregate demand curve. And this shift from 82 to 81 is the expansionary fiscal policy. So using fiscal policy to expand the economy and boost output. Okay, so like I said, you can do the government can spend more, they could decrease taxes, or some combination of both. But remember this, so just note that this doesn't include. So remember we defined the GDP categories. It doesn't include transfer payments. So like any of the stimulus checks or any unemployment payments, that's not government spending. That's basically just sending money from one from the government to someone else. Now, if those payments lead to more spending and production, then that's shown in that avenue. But the specific nature of just stimulus payments or unemployment pay and stuff like that, that's not government spending. Okay, so it's only when that money leads to new production that it becomes recorded in GDP. But something that's been a big, I want to say, avenue of government spending would be all that funding for the vaccines and like coronavirus testing. So there's been a huge budget or a huge amount of money spent by the federal government that directly led to the production of vaccines, the production of testing, and the production of all that. So that would be government spending because that's leading to new production. Okay, so you know the the vaccines have value, and increasing the production of those increases GDP. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So if you're right. So leading to the production of new roads and infrastructure, that's leading to a new good or service. And so yeah, that's government spending. Exactly right. So when it leads to new GDP production, um, or especially new infrastructure, like if it leads to the infrastructure of new solar plants or any other new infrastructure or new roads, yeah, that's exactly right. So if the government spending directly leads to the production of new stuff, that would definitely be considered government spending. Okay. The other type of fiscal policy is called contractionary, and so this would be used if we think inflation is a problem. So this is used to combat or to slow down if we think we have demand pull inflation. So contractionary fiscal policy is doing the opposite, either decreasing government spending, increasing taxes, or some combination of both. So yeah, like a decrease in government spending would just be spending less than the previous, budget, and obviously increasing taxes would increase the general public's disposable income. They pay more taxes, they have less consumption spending, and they spend less. So in theory, either of these options would slow down the economy and kind of prevent inflation. Okay, and that is shown here, where if inflation gets too high, if P goes up to a really high P2, and we want to slow down the economy, we can use government spending or fiscal policy to decrease the AD curve by the opposite direction. So if you look at the equation, All right, so if you decrease government spending, that drops GDP, and that decreases the AD curve. Or if you increase taxes, that decreases C, consumption spending, and that would also decrease GDP. And both of those things would uh, lead to a leftward shift or a decrease in the AD curve. Okay. So expansionary fiscal policy is increasing G and or decreasing taxes to boost the AD curve to the right, like that. Contractionary fiscal policy is decreasing G or increasing taxes to decrease the AD curve to go this way. So this AD curve shift is the result of more G or less taxes is expansionary fiscal policy, and this AD curve shift as the result of less government spending or higher taxes is contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, well, I guess we talked about this one, and we talked about this one. So a few more things here. All right, so fiscal policy and the tools and how we use that to either expand or contract the economy. So everyone good so far on what we've talked about here and kind of what fiscal policy means in this context. Okay, perfect. Right. So now I want to show you the investment demand curve on slide 21. We're going to get to this we're going to use this in more detail in the uh, monetary policy chapter, and also this concept of crowding out, which doesn't really apply anymore. But okay, so first, the investment demand curve is this blue line, which shows that investment, like private investment, is negatively related to interest rates. So if the real interest rate is the cost of borrowing, which it is, then when interest rates go down, investment goes up because the cost of borrowing is gone. So if it becomes cheaper to borrow money, the investment in the economy goes up. If the interest rate goes up, it becomes more costly to borrow money and investment goes down. So that shows the investment demand curve. Now, what the crowding out effect is supposed to illustrate is that there used to be, there sometimes was a concern that too much government spending would lead to interest rate increases in the private sector, all right? And that would crowd out so the gains from government spending would lead to decreases in the private sector. So basically, like, increasing this too much would just get offset by this decreasing. And the idea is that all the government spending, because they have to borrow to spend, that would push interest rates up because if the government wants to spend more and more, they're going to have to borrow at higher interest rates. And that's going to also result in higher interest rates in the private investment market. And that's going to basically, the idea for crowding out is that more government spending causing higher rates is going to lead to less private investment because they're now borrowing at higher rates and they're going to invest less. Now, we don't really see this one for one problem, but so here's the idea. So there's here's the investment demand curve ID1, and if all that public investment or government spending pushed up interest rates, right? So if this is the private sector and all that borrowing by the government pushed up just the general level of interest rates, the cost of borrowing, then let's say we go from 6% to 10%. So first of all, these interest rates are much lower than this right now, but let's just say we start at 6% and the interest rate gets pushed to 10%. So the crowding out problem would be the decrease in private investment being offset by public investment. So that's the concern. But it's also possible, which probably happens, is when the government spends, that could also lead to more attractive or just more investments in the private sector, and that might just lead to an increase in the ID curve. Now, the real, I mean, the issue here is that interest rates are so low that this crowding out effect really isn't a concern right now. But the concept of crowding out, if you've ever heard this term, is public spending going up and pushing up the interest rate or cost to borrow, and that leading to less private investment. So public investment crowding out private investment is the idea. That's okay. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about Social Security because it's an interesting topic and it's at the end of this chapter. So slides 22 to 24, last three slides. All right. So Social Security. So more Americans will be receiving benefits as they age. Some problems is income during retirement there's basically there's becoming more and more a bigger percentage of the population that's going to be on Social Security, and something's going to change because the current system won't be supported by something like 2036. And here's the so Social Security is just the benefits that if you're I think the age now is 65, but if you're 65 or over, all right, you can apply for Social Security benefits that are funded by the federal government, and those funds. And so the problem here with that is that the Social Security fund or the Social Security budget is funded by the current working generation. It's not like something that's saved in a. It's not like you save for your own retirement. Uh, this way, so Social Security is funded by the current working generation for the people on Social Security. And the problem is, I think I have a more updated slide here, but the percent of people on Social Security is getting higher and higher as a percent of the population. So the working generation is becoming less or a smaller portion compared to the retired generation. And if the retired generation is funded by Social Security, which is paid by the working generation, then there's less and less uh, of the working population to fund it because this bracket gets bigger. So what we're saying is that more people are getting Social Security funded by less people who are working as a percentage. So this is always a topic. Probably, I mean, probably not the most important thing at the current moment, but it's always going to be something that's discussed in fiscal policy. And some options to, you know, try to fix this problem or try to help it is here's a few things from the textbook. Increase the retirement age, so you can make it so uh, the Social Security benefits start at 70 or something like that. The problem with that option is that if you're 64 and all of a sudden the benefits get pushed to 70, you're not going to like that. Um, you can increase the tax, make the working generation pay more to fund Social Security. Okay, you can have some cutoff where if your wealth or your income is a certain level, you don't qualify for benefits. Um, this is just trying to get the working generation to higher skilled jobs. And this last item here is basically to take out some of the administrative fees or the administrative budget. And so if you let people do it themselves, that would take out a lot of the administrative fees and the transaction costs and having the government organize it. The problem with this is if you let people just do it themselves, they're probably going to mess it up. So okay, and I had a let me see what this link here does. Okay, yeah, so this is a nice graph, and I think it's fairly updated, but we can see that. Oh, there was a yeah, yeah, I know. It's a yeah. So this link that I put in the study guide, so that you qualify for Social Security if you're 65 or over, right? And this shows the share of the 65 or over generation in the U.S. So in 1950, it was like 8%, and now well, we're about 17%, and the projections are, eventually we're going to get like 20%. So the percent of people that qualify for benefits in relation to the whole population is going up. So that's a problem because the we have more people to fund and less people percent wise. Yeah. So 2036 is just if we didn't make any changes, then we'd run out of benefits. But we're going to make changes because people would freak out. So given like whenever that slide was written, given the current system, something would have to change before 2036 to be able to fund everyone that qualifies for Social Security. Um, and so the government's going to have to figure something out. They probably already made some changes, but yeah. So that's that slide I showed you. Okay, so these things, um, a lot of these things have changed over time. So the retirement age went up. It was like 62 years ago, so it went up a little bit. Um, we've definitely increased the portion of taxes that are subject to tax. I think this does occur. I'm not really sure about this statement here. And then this is not so these three things have happened to some degree, and they probably will be, and probably some more things will be thought of. But yeah, so if you look at this little picture here, we're gonna have to keep making changes if we're gonna keep funding more of the population. So the good news is that uh, people are living longer, right? The life expectancy is much longer than it was in 1950. That's good. The bad news is it's harder to pay for Social Security because this portion of people that qualify is going to keep going up and up. Yeah, so your question, the people that are currently on it will stop getting it. It's not it's not like once you qualify, you're locked into you know, it's the it changes every year. So each year your benefits are supplied by the current working population, and so it doesn't matter if you don't get like grandfathered in. Like it's not like if you turn 65, your money's just waiting for you in the vault. Okay, you have to basically if everyone stopped if no one's if everyone stopped working, there'd be no money for Social Security. So you have to have a working generation to be taxed to pay for the Social Security. Okay, and then these are the options. So any, can you think are there any other options we can aside from these bullet points, what else could we do to get more Social Security funded as the working the over 65 generation increases its proportion? So any other ideas? Yeah, that we can do. Okay, I mean you can have a you can start putting 10-year-olds to work and start taxing you know junior high kids, but that's probably not going to happen. Oh, the disqualify wealthy individuals. Um, it's an effect, but it's not like you qualify for less benefits. So depending on your, I'm not sure how it's measured, but yeah. So you depending on your income level or your level of wealth, I'm not sure how they calculate it, but you over a certain income or over a certain wealth, I guess, you don't get as many benefits, but you still qualify for some. So yeah, it is an effect, but it's not like everyone gets something, but I think you qualify for a little bit less if you make a certain amount of income. Okay, so any more? So that was our last term or key concept. Any more um, comments on Social Security before we look at some examples? Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. Okay. So there is another video here on fiscal policy and stimulus. A nice little, I think this is like a Khan Academy one on Social Security. Okay, so you can take a look at that one, and then we have a couple examples. And basically, there's two examples, and there's going to be a homework question, or let me see if there's one or two, but there's two. Okay, so there's two homework questions similar to these ones that we're about to do, and this type of problem is illustrating how you would use the multiplier to do your desired fiscal policy. Okay, so let's go through these examples, and then you can use these as a reference for your homework questions. But let me know if you have any questions. Okay, number one. Okay, so assume that a hypothetical economy with an MPC of 0.8. So I didn't define this term, but it's in the textbook, I think. And the MPC is the marginal propensity to consume. I'll write that here. Okay, and the idea is that depending on where the economy is, the spending change on the margin is changes. So if, like for example, if we're in a big recession and people get more income, they're going to spend a lot. They're going to spend a lot of it. If we're already in a boom and people get more income, they're going to spend a little bit less of it. So the amount of new money that they will spend on the margin is represented by this. So if you see that 0.8, that essentially means that any new money received via government fiscal policy is going to lead to 80% of it being spent into the economy. So that 0.8 is how much of that new money will be spent on the margin. So if you see the 0.8, that's essentially telling you that, like, if you get if someone gets $100, or if the average person gets $100, they'll spend $80 of it. So that's how much of new income they're going to spend, and that's important because if the economy is going to spend less, they're going to save more, that's going to affect the economy more. So the more, in terms of this fiscal policy, the more people spend new money right direct into the economy, the idea is that helps the economy quicker. Okay, so you get an MPC of 0.8, and we're in a severe recession. Okay, so like this little here, the size of the multiplier depends upon uh, households' marginal decision to spend, called the marginal propensity to consume. Oh, I already wrote it here. Okay, and the multiplier we discussed can be directly calculated by the MPC by this simple equation, which is 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. Okay, so in these questions you'll get MPC. Just take this formula, plug in the MPC, and you'll get your multiplier. Okay, and it'll make total sense that if consumers spend more on average of new income, then the multiplier is going to be higher. If they spend less of it, if they save more, the multiplier is going to be lower. Okay, part A. By how much would government spending have to rise to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 25 billion? So the first thing you want to do is take the MPC that was given and calculate the multiplier. So here's the general equation. The multiplier goes 1 over 1 minus the MPC. Okay, that's always the equation. All you got to do is plug in the MPC of 0.8 into that equation. So that's going to be the multiplier, big M, is 1 over 1 minus the MPC of 0.8. Okay, that just, if you do the math, that's 1 over 0.2. Okay, 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2. And 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. So by using this equation, plugging in the MPC of 0.8, we have a multiplier of 5. Okay, so use that to answer the question. So basically, you can think of this part as the general equation for government spending. So basically, it's how much do we have to increase government spending, which is going to be multiplied by the multiplier to get our desired effect of aggregate demand increase. Okay, so what amount of government spending, knowing that you're going to multiply it, is going to give you your desired outcome of the shift in the AD curve. Okay, so start with this equation. Plug in your multiplier of 5, and then plug in your desired increase of AD, which the question says is 25. Okay, so all we're doing here is we're saying what increase in government spending times 5 is going to give us 25. All right, so it's pretty simple once you get to this point. What times 5 is 25, or 25 divided by 5 is 5. So we're basically saying if we have a multiplier of 5, if we increase government spending by 5, multiplied by 5, that gives us 25. So that's the answer. And in words, it's government spending would have to rise by 5 billion to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 25 billion. So this is what you're looking for here. Okay, so do we see what does that make sense? What we tried to calculate there? Okay, well, let's do part B. So part B is doing the tax cut. So part A was doing the fiscal policy about government spending. Part B is doing the fiscal policy by cutting taxes. So part B is how large a tax cut would be needed to achieve the same increase in AD. Okay, so start with this equation. The only difference here is that when we get new money via tax cuts, you got to worry about the MPC, because if the MPC is 0.8, that means that any new money that you get, like if you get new money because you're paying less taxes, only 80% of that goes into the economy because the rest of it is safe. Okay, so you have to put that into your effect here. And so it's hard to illustrate the time effects, but the trade-off, I guess, is that government spending goes directly into the economy. You don't lose any. The problem with government spending is it takes a while. So it takes a while to build that infrastructure or make those investments, whereas tax cuts go right into the economy. The problem is only a portion of that goes into the economy. So increasing government spending, you don't lose any. It just takes longer. Cutting taxes, you lose a portion, but it goes right into the economy. So there's the trade-off between not losing any by government spending, but taking longer, or getting it right into the economy, but it's not as effective. Okay, so you can use this little equation that I wrote, where it's basically the change in taxes times the multiplier times the MPC is going to be equal to your desired change in AD. Okay, so just plug in the terms you know. You're looking for this. All right, so the multiplier is 5, the MPC is 0.8, and you want to increase aggregate demand by 25. All right, then if you multiply 5 times 0.8, that's gives you a number of 4 here. And so we're saying what cut in taxes times 4 would give us 25. All right, just divide 25 by 4, and we know that 6.25 times 4 would give us the 25. Okay, so in words, that means a tax cut of 6.25 billion would be needed to achieve the same increase in AD. So what I showed you here is that if the government wants to increase the aggregate demand curve by 25 billion, they can either increase government spending by 5 billion, or they could cut taxes by 6.25 billion. So either one would do the same thing. See, this one is more efficient. This one is quicker. All right, then part C is most likely the government is going to use some, when they want to hit some goal, they're not going to just do it by government spending or cutting taxes. They're going to use some combination of both. And so that's part C. So determine one possible combination of government spending increases and tax decreases that would accomplish the same goal. So the part C's for this question, there's no one answer, because you can break it up any way you want. So all I want you to do here is you want to hit the 25, and you want to do part of it with government spending and the rest of it with tax cuts. Okay, so you want to do a portion of it with government spending and a portion of it with tax cuts. Now, it doesn't matter which numbers you choose. It's easier to try to pick things that the math is easier, but see how I'm going to do 5 billion with government spending and 20 billion with tax cuts. And so 20 plus 5 is the 25 total. So the part you do with government spending and the rest that you do with tax cuts has to equal the total of 25. So see how 5 plus 20 is 25. Okay? So if you want to increase government spending by 5 billion, or if you want to increase aggregate demand by 5 billion by government spending, what times 5 is 5? 5 divided by 5, so you increase government spending by 1 billion. Now we're doing the other 20 with tax cuts. Okay, so plug in our multiplier, plug in our MPC, and we're trying to do the remaining 20 with tax cuts. So what times 4 equals 20? 20 divided by 4, that's 5. So what we determined here is that one way you could do it by using both tools is increase government spending by 1. That'll cover 5 billion. and increase or cut taxes by 5, that'll cover the other 20. And that plus that is the total effect you want, which is 25. So what I'm trying to say here is that one possible combination that would accomplish the same goal of 25 billion is increase government spending by 1 billion and cut taxes by 5. So we've looked at 3 different options to increase aggregate demand by 25 billion. You could either increase government spending by 5 billion, you could cut taxes by 6.25 billion, or you could increase government spending by 1 billion and cut taxes by 5 billion. Okay, so there's other combinations, but we've looked at 3 ways in which the government can use fiscal policy to get this desired outcome of shifting AD by 25 billion. Okay, so for these questions, part A, you'll do the whole thing with government spending. Part B, you'll do the whole fiscal policy with tax cuts. In part C, you'll have to calculate some combination that uses some government spending and some taxes, in total does the same effect. Okay, so we'll go through one other example here, but do we get the idea? Do we see what we're trying to accomplish in this question? Okay, well, I can't tell if we've got it or not, but we'll do another example. If you have any questions on what we're doing, let me know, because there's a couple questions like this on the homework, but you can use this as a reference. So the same process here. Okay, number 2. Same question, different numbers. Assume the hypothetical economy with an MPC of 0.75. All right, so right away you know that any money received via tax cuts, only 75% of it goes into the economy. So MPC is 0.75, is in a recession. Part A, by how much would government spending have to rise to shift the AD curve rightward now by 75 billion? Okay, so I try to make the math kind of work out nicely. First thing you want to do is calculate the multiplier with the same equation. The multiplier goes 1 over 1 minus the MPC, and big M is 1 over 1 minus the MPC of 0.75. And 1 divided by 0.25. So 1 minus 0.75 is 0.25, and 1 divided by 0.25 is 4. So now our multiplier is 4. So the multiplier always changes, and it directly depends on what the MPC is. So first thing you want to do is take the MPC, put it in this equation, and find out what the multiplier is. And you can probably see that if the MPC goes down, the multiplier goes down. If the MPC goes up, the multiplier goes up. Okay, start with the same equation. What change in government spending times the multiplier gives you the desired change in AD. Plug in your multiplier for this question of 4. Plug in your goal of 75. All right, and what times 4 is 75? 75 divided by 4. So if you increase government spending by 18.75 times a multiplier of 4, that gives you 75. So government spending would have to rise by 18.75 billion to shift the AD curve rightward by 75 billion. So remember, that's because any change in government spending is multiplied by the multiplier, and 18.75 times the multiplier we calculated of 4 gives us the goal. So we don't have the idea here is that the government doesn't have to increase government spending by 75 billion, they just have to increase government spending by the appropriate number times the multiplier to get the goal. Okay, part B. How large a tax cut would be needed to achieve the same increase in AD? So again, use this equation because any new money from taxes, only a certain percent of it goes into the economy, and in this case, only 75%. So here's your equation. The change in taxes times the multiplier times the MPC equals the outcome you want to achieve in AD. So plug in everything you know, and you're trying to solve for the delta T, the change in taxes. Okay, we know the multiplier is 4. We were given that the MPC is 0.75, and it was given that the goal was 75 to increase AD. All right, now just do the math. 4 times 0.75 is 3. What times 3 is 0.75? 75 divided by 3 is 25. So a tax cut of 25 billion would be needed to achieve the same increase in AD. So we can, to shift the AD curve by 75 billion, we can either increase government spending by 18.75 billion. Okay, that takes longer, or we could cut taxes by 25 billion. Okay, that happens right away, but it's less effective. See how it takes more to do it, so you can see the trade-off. This takes less, but it takes longer. This takes more money, but it happens quicker. Okay, part C. Determine one possible combination of both, of government spending increases and tax decreases that would accomplish the same goal. So now we're doing it. So part A, government spending only. Part B, tax cuts only. Part C, you want to use both and accomplish some of it with government spending and the rest of it with tax cuts. Okay, so let's do part of it with this equation and the rest of it with this equation. All right, and so just because the math kind of worked out evenly, I chose to do 48 billion with government spending and the other 27 billion with tax cuts. So you can see that 48 plus 27 is the total effect of 75. Okay, so you always want to make sure that this number and this number sum to whatever your target was from part A. Okay, and so the reason I chose 48 here and 27 here is because it comes out evenly. What for government spending? So what change in G times 4 would increase AD by 48. That's just 48 divided by 4. And that's a change in government spending of 12 would cover the 48. Okay, the rest of it is going to be covered by tax cuts, which is 27. So what change in taxes times a multiplier of 4 times 0.75 would give us 27. So that's 4 times 0.75 is 3. What change in taxes times 3 equals 27? 27 divided by 3 is 9. Okay, so you can kind of play around with it. It doesn't, if it comes out to decimals or fractions, that's fine, but you can usually think of ways in which if you know this is divided by 4 and this is divided by 3, it'll come out to whole numbers. And so what I've determined is that one possible combination that would accomplish the same goal, okay, to get the AD curve to shift by 75 billion, you could do both these things. Increase government spending by 12 billion and cut taxes by 9 billion. Okay, so what we showed in this example is to increase AD by 75 billion, you can do all government spending, increase government spending by 18.75 billion. You could cut taxes by 25 billion, or you could do some combination, and this combination was increase government spending by 12 billion and cut taxes by 9 billion. So either of these three outcomes, here, here, or here, would shift the AD curve by 75 billion. Okay, so part A is, again, just do it with government spending. Part B is do it all with taxes. And then part C, okay, your answer can be different because it depends on how you break it up. So part A, there's only one right answer. Part B, there's only one right answer. Okay, this one, it depends on how you decide to break up the numbers, but the total effect has to sum to whatever the target was from part A. Okay, um, we get it. We get the idea of what to do here when you get this on your homework questions. All right, so a few more examples, and then we're almost done. Okay, so numbers 3 and number 4 don't really have to worry about those for the homework, but important things we talked about. So number 3 was the crowding out thing again. So using the ID curve, explain the argument for and against crowding out. Okay, so here's the translation. So the figure shows the investment demand curve and the crowding out effect. If the investment demand curve is fixed, the increase in the interest rate from 6% to 10% caused by financing a large public debt would move the economy from A to B. So that's the crowding out of 10 billion of private investment. So that's the crowding out, this arrow, and decreasing the size of the capital stock inherited by future generations. However, the counter argument is if the public goods enabled by the debt improve the investment projects, if there's more things to invest in, the private investment demand curve will shift rightward from ID to ID2. So this is the increase in investment demand at the same interest rates. Okay, so that shift may offset the crowding out effect wholly or in part. In this case, it moves the economy from A to C. All right, so this just shows the range of arguments where uh, losing private investment from public debt is crowding out, but public spending might lead to more projects that you can invest in, and that would lead to an increase in investment demand. So there's the whole range of things where this is the crowding out, but that can be offset by just more investment because there's more things to invest in. 4, Social Security. Okay, what are the broad options for fixing the long run problem? So this is just from the slide. The possible options to fix include increasing the retirement age, increasing the portion of earnings subject to the tax, disqualifying wealthy individuals, and defined contribution plans owned by individuals. Okay, so this is just making it so less people get qualify or just increasing the age. This is increasing the taxes that come from the working generation to fund it, disqualifying some people who make over a certain income level, and this is privatizing it and taking out the administrative costs. Okay, so you'll see that your homework, which is due next week, is just a couple questions like we just went through with the MPC and the fiscal policy. So here you have 2 of them. So what you want to do is take the MPC, all right, calculate the multiplier, and then do the outcome by just government spending, do the outcome by just tax cuts, and then find out one combination that would achieve the goal together of 190. All right, so use that example, and it's the same thing with this one. We have an MPC of 0.9. Always start with the equation, get the multiplier, then part A, do it with just government spending. Part B, do it with just taxes, and then part C, you're gonna figure out some combination where you get part of it with government spending, part of it with tax cuts, and you get the final goal of 90. All right, so use the ones we just went through as a nice reference there. Okay, so um, we're just about done. All right, so the chapter 10, 11 homework is due today, so post that here. All right, so that needs to be posted soon, so let me know if you have any questions on that, but get those homeworks in. Um, the chapter 12 and 13 homework is due next Monday that I just showed you, so that's going to go here. And if you have any questions on that, you can email me. So this is due today. This is due next Monday, and then we'll talk about we'll cover chapter 14 next Monday, which is it's a nice chapter to read if you have it. It's doing some money and banking and some financial economic stuff that'll set up the fiscal policy. Uh, sorry, the monetary policy chapter, chapter 15. Okay, so that's due today. That's due next Monday, and next Monday we'll cover chapter 14. All right. Okay, I think that's it, and I'll see everyone in a week next Monday. Have a good rest of your week, and thanks for joining. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Professor, I have a question real quick.
Yeah, no problem.
The final exam, it's when did you say it was? The
Uh,
final test.
The final test, well, it's a take-home exam just like the other
Yeah.
ones. Let me see. It's due the Monday of finals week. So let me see.
And will we have the same amount of time as the last two exams, or?
Yeah, it's so just think of it like as another midterm.
Okay,
So
all right,
it's due like the syllabus says Monday, May 24th, and
all right.
I mean actually it's already here. So if you go to the final exam spring 2021
Yeah.
section, the exam is right there. And so we'll do a
Okay.
little review session a week before, but you'll have after the review session you have a week to do it. So it's no longer than the previous test.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Okay. You too. Thanks.